He didn't hesitate as his foot came up and drove into her ribs, right there on the bar floor, while everyone watched. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just stayed down as if she knew something he didn't. Because the moment he kicked her, the doors behind him were already opening and the man walking in owned far more than the bar he was standing in. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. Hey, move. The shove came without warning. Diana stumbled sideways, her shoulder slamming into the bar counter. Glass rattled. Ice clinked against crystal. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, laughter dying in throats as heads turned. Kenneth Clark stood over her, his breath heavy with whiskey and something darker entitlement that had aged into cruelty. His suit jacket hung open, tie loosened, face flushed with alcohol, and the kind of confidence that comes from never facing consequences. "Still can't stay on your feet?" he sneered, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. His voice carried that same mocking tone she remembered from years ago, the one that used to make her shrink. "Some things never change, huh?" Diana caught herself against the polished wood, her palms flat, breathing steady. Around her, the warm amber glow of the Tiger's Den suddenly felt cold. The neon sign behind the bar, red and gold letters spelling out the bar's name, cast harsh shadows across Kenneth's face, making him look almost theatrical in his cruelty. People watched. A man in a plaid shirt laughed nervously, then looked away. A woman at a nearby table whispered something to her companion. The bartender froze mid-pour, bottle suspended in the air. Others turned back to their drinks, embarrassed to witness but unwilling to intervene. Kenneth took a step closer. His dress shoes, expensive but worn at the heels, scraped against the wooden floor. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or did life finally teach you to keep your mouth shut?" Diana straightened slowly, her worn leather jacket creaking softly with the movement. She kept her eyes down, not from fear, but from calculation. Her jeans were faded, her black boots scuffed. To everyone watching, she looked exactly like what Kenneth wanted them to see, someone who'd been broken and stayed that way. "I don't want trouble, Kenneth," she said quietly. That only fueled him. His face twisted with something ugly, something that had been waiting years for this moment. "Trouble? You don't want trouble?" He laughed, harsh and grating. "You are trouble. Always were. Walking disaster. Remember that? Remember when you lost your job? When your old man died and you came crying to me?" Diana's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. "I tried to help you," Kenneth continued, his voice rising. "Tried to make something of you. But you were too weak, too pathetic. I did us both a favor when I left." A few patrons shifted uncomfortably. One man stood as if to intervene, but his friend grabbed his arm, pulling him back down. Nobody wanted to be part of this. Kenneth turned to the room, arms spread like a performer. "This is what happens when you don't learn your place. Life catches up with you. You end up right back where you started, alone, broke, and worthless." Then he raised his foot and kicked her. The impact caught Diana in the ribs, just below her left arm. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to send her sprawling. She went down onto one knee, her hand shooting out to catch herself. Glass crunched beneath her palm, someone's dropped bottle, shattered earlier and never cleaned up properly. The sound echoed louder than the jukebox in the corner, louder than the muted conversations, louder than the blood rushing in her ears. Pain bloomed across her side, sharp and hot. But Diana didn't scream. She didn't beg. She pressed her palm flat against the floor, sticky with spilled beer and years of wear, and breathed slowly through her nose. In, out, controlled. Because she knew something Kenneth didn't, something nobody in that bar could possibly guess. She wasn't powerless anymore. Her phone buzzed once against her hip, a soft vibration only she could feel. She didn't need to look at it to know what it said. She'd felt that same pattern 100 times before. "On my way." Kenneth stood over her, chest heaving, looking down at her with satisfaction written across every line of his face. This was what he'd wanted. This was the confirmation he'd needed, that he'd been right all along, that she deserved everything that had happened to her. "Stay down," he said, quieter now, almost gentle. That made it worse somehow. "It's where you belong." Diana lifted her head slowly. Her honey blonde hair fell across one eye, but through the strands, she looked at him with something that wasn't fear, something Kenneth couldn't quite identify. Pity, maybe, or certainty. The bar had gone completely silent now. Even the jukebox seemed to have given up, the last notes of some forgotten blues song fading into nothing. People stared, some with their phones out, recording. Others looked sick, ashamed to have watched and done nothing. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in pressure, like a storm rolling in from somewhere dark and distant. The conversations that had started to resume died again. Someone near the door stood up abruptly, knocking their chair backward. The doors to the tiger's den swung open. 3 men entered first. They moved with the kind of silence that makes a room hold its breath. Broad-shouldered, dressed in black suits that looked like they cost more than most people's cars. Their faces were stone, eyes scanning the room with professional detachment. One had close-cropped hair and a scar through his left eyebrow. Another was bald, massive, his hands hanging loose at his sides like weapons waiting to be deployed. The third wore dark sunglasses despite the dim lighting, his jaw set like granite. They fanned out, flanking the entrance. Then came the fourth man. He didn't rush, didn't need to. Black suit, tailored perfectly to his athletic frame. White dress shirt open at the collar, no tie. Dark hair slicked back, slight stubble shadowing his jaw. But it was the tattoos that caught the eye, ink crawling up his neck, like warnings written in a language everyone understood but nobody spoke aloud. Serpents and skulls and words in Spanish that promised things best left unspoken. His eyes swept the room once. Cold, calculating. Then they locked onto Diana on the floor. Everything else ceased to exist. Kenneth turned, his smirk still in place but starting to crack at the edges. What the hell is this? Some kind of rescue squad? The man in the black suit didn't answer. He crossed the floor with measured steps, glass crunching under his expensive leather shoes. When he reached Diana, he knelt down beside her, his movements gentle in a way that contradicted everything else about him. "Talk to me," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, almost tender. Diana looked up at him, and something passed between them, something private, something that made the air feel charged. Kenneth laughed, but it sounded wrong now. Uncertain. "What is this? You her new boyfriend?" The man in the black suit stood slowly, turning to face Kenneth. He adjusted his cuffs with deliberate care, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. "My wife." The word crushed the room. The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. "Wife." Kenneth's face went slack for a moment, then twisted into something between disbelief and mockery. "Wife? Her?" He gestured at Diana dismissively, but his hand shook slightly. "That's cute, real cute. Did you pick her up at some charity event?" The man in the black suit didn't respond. He extended his hand to Diana, helping her to her feet with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone who looked like he'd been carved from stone and violence. Diana stood, accepting his jacket as he draped it over her shoulders. The fabric still held his warmth. She could feel every eye in the bar on her. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel exposed. She felt protected, but inside, old wounds were opening. 5 years earlier, Diana had believed in love once. Believed in it the way you believe in gravity or sunrise, something fundamental, unquestionable, permanent. Kenneth had been charming in the beginning, attentive. He'd take her to dinner at places she couldn't afford, order wine he claimed to understand, talk about a future that sounded like someone else's dream but felt close enough to touch. "You're too good for that job," he'd say, watching her come home exhausted from double shifts at the diner. "You deserve better," she'd believed him. When her boss cut her hours, Kenneth encouraged her to quit. "I'll take care of you," he'd promised, "just until you find something better, something worthy of you." So she quit. 2 weeks later, her father had a stroke. Diana remembered the hospital hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of disinfectant and despair. Her phone pressed to her ear as she called Kenneth, voice breaking. "I need you," she'd whispered. "Please, I can't do this alone." "I'm in the middle of something," he'd said, distracted. "Can this wait?" Her father died 3 days later. Kenneth came to the funeral, stayed for 20 minutes, left before the burial. "I can't be around this kind of negativity right now," he'd told her later. Standing in her apartment, the one he'd convinced her to rent because it was perfect for us, even though his name was never on the lease. "You're dragging me down, Diana. I'm trying to build something here, and you're just stuck." She'd been sitting on the couch her father had given her when she moved out, the one piece of furniture she'd kept from her old life. "I just lost my dad," she'd said, voice hollow. "I just need time." "Time?" Kenneth laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't have time. You don't have a job. You don't have money. You don't have anything. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I tried, Diana. God knows I tried. But I can't save someone who won't save themselves. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That click echoed for months. Diana had learned what rock bottom felt like. It felt like sitting in an empty apartment with an eviction notice on the table and her father's funeral bill unpaid. It felt like applying for 30 jobs in a week and hearing nothing back. It felt like standing in the shower fully clothed because you couldn't remember when you'd last had the energy to undress. It felt like invisible. Some people break and shatter. Others break and reform into something harder. Diana chose the latter. She sold everything: furniture, jewelry, books, the television Kenneth had given her but never actually paid for. She left the city with $400 in cash and a bus ticket to somewhere nobody knew her name. She worked, cleaned hotel rooms, waited tables, learned Spanish from the women who worked alongside her, learned to read people from the men who underestimated her, learned that silence could be a form of strength. She disappeared deliberately, completely, and in that disappearance, she found something Kenneth had tried to take from her: herself. Present, standing in the tiger's den now, wearing her husband's jacket, Diana felt the weight of those years settle around her like armor. Kenneth didn't know any of this. He'd never asked where she'd gone, never wondered if she'd survived. In his mind, she'd simply ceased to exist, and her non-existence proved he'd been right to leave. Now he was staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. The man beside her, Ramon Molina, though Kenneth didn't know that name yet, kept his hand lightly on the small of Diana's back. Not possessive, protective. There was a difference. "You okay?" Ramon asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Diana nodded, then realized that wasn't enough. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm okay." Ramon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd asked if she was physically okay. Her answer told him what he needed to know. She was hurt, but functional. That was all that mattered for now. They'd deal with the rest later. Kenneth was still talking, his voice climbing with each word. "This is insane. You can't just— who even are you, man? You think you can walk in here and— Kenneth." Diana's voice cut through his rambling like a blade through silk. He stopped, mouth half open. She stepped forward slightly, out from under Ramon's jacket. The bar's amber light caught her face, highlighting the faint scar along her jawline she'd gotten from a kitchen accident in Albuquerque. The new hardness in her eyes Kenneth didn't recognize. "You asked me once why I was always so weak," she said quietly. "Why I couldn't just be stronger, be better." Kenneth shifted uncomfortably. "I was trying to help." "You were trying to break me," Diana interrupted. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it made people lean forward to listen. "Because my weakness made you feel strong. My need made you feel needed. When I lost everything, you didn't see someone to help. You saw dead weight. That's not— You kicked me tonight because you thought I was still that girl." Diana took another step forward. Kenneth instinctively stepped back. "You thought you could still make me small." The three men in black suits hadn't moved, but their presence seemed to fill more space now, pressing in from the edges of the room. "But I'm not her anymore," Diana continued. "I survived you, Kenneth. I survived losing everything. I rebuilt myself piece by piece in places you'll never see, with people you'll never meet." She paused, letting the words settle. "And then I found someone who saw strength where you saw weakness." Ramon remained still, but his eyes never left Kenneth's face. Diana's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet somehow everyone heard. "Tonight you made a choice. You chose violence. You chose cruelty. You chose to hurt someone you thought was powerless." Kenneth's face had gone pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "You chose wrong." The bar doors clicked. Locked. The sound of the locks engaging was soft, just a subtle click from the front entrance, and another from the side door near the restrooms. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Everyone noticed. Kenneth's eyes darted to the exits, then back to the three men in black suits positioned strategically around the room. The bald one near the front door stood with his hands clasped in front of him, expression blank. The one with the scar through his eyebrow had moved to block the side exit without anyone seeing him do it. The third, still wearing his sunglasses, leaned against the jukebox, arms crossed. "Wait," Kenneth said, his voice climbing an octave. "Wait, this is— you can't just lock people in here. That's illegal. That's— kidnapping?" Ramon Molina finished for him, his tone conversational. "False imprisonment?" He tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely considering the question. "You're right. Those are serious crimes." He let the silence stretch. "So is assault. The bartender, a thin man in his 50s with a gray ponytail, slowly set down the glass he'd been pretending to clean and backed away from the counter. A couple near the window gathered their coats without being told, moving toward the door, then stopping when the scarred man shook his head once. They sat back down. Ramon moved past Diana, his steps measured and unhurried. His shoes made almost no sound on the wooden floor despite the broken glass scattered across it. He was tall, not towering, but solid, built like someone who'd learned to fight in places where losing meant disappearing. The tattoos on his neck seemed to shift in the amber light. A serpent coiling around letters Diana knew spelled out the names of the dead. Not victims, brothers. Kenneth backed up until he hit a bar stool, nearly toppling it. "Look, man, I don't know what she told you, but she didn't tell me anything." Ramon stopped about 6 feet away, hands loose at his sides. "I saw it. We all saw it." He gestured to the room without taking his eyes off Kenneth. "You shoved my wife. You humiliated her in public." His voice remained calm, almost pleasant. "Then you kicked her while she was on the ground. I didn't know." "That she was married?" Ramon finished. "That's your defense? That you assault women as long as you don't know their husbands?" A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere in the back of the bar, quickly stifled. Kenneth's face flushed red. "That's not what I meant. I meant I didn't know she was married to... He trailed off because he didn't actually know. Didn't know who Ramon was. Didn't understand what name carried weight in this city. What colors meant territory. What silence meant death. But he was starting to guess. Ramon Molina had rules. He'd built an empire on them. Rule 1. Respect the hierarchy. From the street dealers to the accountants to the men who drove the trucks, everyone had a place, and staying in that place kept you breathing. Rule 2. Honor the code. No children. No civilians unless they made themselves part of the game. No unnecessary violence. Clean, efficient, professional. Rule 3. Family is sacred. Not blood family necessarily, though that mattered too. But the family you chose. The family you built. The people you protected because protecting them was the only thing that made the rest of the darkness bearable. Diana was family. She'd come into his life like a ghost, working at a restaurant he owned through 6 shell companies, serving tables like she was invisible, never asking questions about the men in suits who came in after hours, never listening to conversations she shouldn't hear. He'd noticed her because she didn't try to be noticed. One night, 3 men had started trouble. Drunk, loud, handsy with the staff. Ramon's men were there, about to intervene, when Diana stepped in. She didn't yell, didn't threaten, just smiled and said something too quiet for Ramon to hear. All 3 men went pale, paid their tab, and left. Later, Ramon asked what she'd said. "I told them the owner doesn't like messes," Diana replied, clearing their table. "And that cleaning up messes here means someone has to mop blood off tile." I asked if they wanted to be the mess. Ramon had laughed. Actually laughed. "You know who I am?" he'd asked. "Everyone knows who you are, Mr. Molina. And you're not afraid?" Diana met his eyes, then really met them. No flinching. No performance. "I've been afraid before. Real fear. The kind that makes you small. This," she gestured around the restaurant, "this is just business." 6 months later, he'd asked her to dinner. A real one, not business. She'd said yes, but made him wait 2 weeks because she needed to think about it. No one made Ramon Molina wait for anything. He'd waited. A year after that, he'd asked her to marry him in a garden where nothing grew except white roses and truth. She'd said yes immediately, but her hands shook when she took the ring. "I'm not who you think I am," she'd whispered. "I know exactly who you are." Ramon had replied, "You're someone who survived something that should have destroyed you. You're someone who learned to stand when the world wanted you on your knees." He'd kissed her knuckles, scarred from restaurant work and old wounds. "You're someone worth protecting." Kenneth didn't know any of this. Couldn't know it. All he knew was that the man in the black suit was looking at him the way a surgeon looks at a tumor, something to be removed, not reasoned with. "I'm sorry," Kenneth blurted out. "Okay? I'm sorry. I was drunk. I was stupid. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Ramon's voice cut through the excuses like a knife through silk. "You meant every word, every action. You enjoyed it." Kenneth opened his mouth. Closed it. "You kicked her because you thought she was powerless," Ramon continued. "You thought there would be no consequences. No one to answer to. You thought you could hurt her and walk away like it never happened." He took 1 step closer. "You were wrong on all counts." The bald enforcer by the door shifted his weight. a subtle movement that nonetheless drew every eye in the room. The message was clear. No one was leaving until this was finished. Diana remained near the bar, Ramon's jacket still draped over her shoulders. She watched Kenneth with an expression that wasn't quite satisfaction, wasn't quite pity, something more complicated, something that looked like closure approaching from a distance. Ramon glanced back at her, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded once, permission granted. Ramon turned back to Kenneth, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You know what the problem with men like you is?" Kenneth didn't answer. "You mistake kindness for weakness. You see someone who doesn't fight back and assume they can't. But Diana didn't fight back tonight because she didn't need to." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "She has me." Ramon snapped his fingers once. The 3 enforcers moved. The enforcers didn't rush. They didn't need to. Kenneth stumbled backward, knocking over the bar stool behind him. It clattered against the wooden floor, the sound sharp and final in the silence. "Wait, just wait a second." But Ramon raised one hand, and the 3 men stopped where they were, frozen mid-step like statues given temporary life and then revoked. "Not yet," Ramon said quietly. Kenneth's relief lasted exactly 2 seconds before he realized this was worse. The waiting, the anticipation, the knowledge that these men would move when commanded, and not one moment before. Ramon walked past Kenneth without looking at him, moving instead to the bar. He gestured to the bartender, who approached with visible reluctance. "Bourbon, neat, 2 glasses." The bartender's hands shook as he poured. Ramon accepted both glasses, carried them back to where Diana stood. He handed her one, then touched the rim of his glass to hers. "2, surviving," he said softly. Diana's fingers tightened around the glass. "2 surviving," she echoed. They drank while Kenneth watched, confused and terrified in equal measure, while the entire bar watched, while the city outside continued its oblivious rotation, unaware that inside the tiger's den, a man's fate was being decided over good bourbon and broken glass. Ramon Molina's empire wasn't built on violence, though violence was certainly part of the foundation. It was built on understanding that every city has invisible borders, that every neighborhood has a hierarchy, that power isn't about who shouts loudest but who whispers and gets heard. He controlled 6 districts in the southern corridor. Not officially, no maps showed his territory, no government documents bore his name, but the people who mattered knew. The dealers knew which corners were his. The club owners knew which establishments paid tribute. The cops knew which crimes to investigate and which to file away and forget. Ramon's operation was a machine of clockwork precision. Drugs moved through channels cleaner than most legitimate businesses. Money flowed through car washes, laundromats, restaurants, construction companies, each one profitable in its own right, each one serving a secondary purpose. He employed 200 people directly, another 500 indirectly. He'd never spent a day in jail. That wasn't luck. That was discipline. His men were professionals. The bald one by the door, Ernesto, had been with him for 12 years, saved Ramon's life in a warehouse in Juarez when a deal went bad. The scarred one, Leo, was ex-military, dishonorably discharged for reasons that remained classified, recruited because he understood chain of command and kept his mouth shut. The one in sunglasses, Mateo, was the youngest, barely 30, but he had a gift for reading situations, for knowing when to escalate and when to de-escalate. All 3 would die for Ramon without hesitation, but more importantly, all 3 knew when not to kill. That distinction was what separated Ramon's organization from the chaos that had consumed so many others. He didn't rule through fear alone. He ruled through respect, through fairness, through the understanding that loyalty flows 2 ways. You protect yours, your family, your people, your territory. Diana was his family, and Kenneth had violated every rule that mattered. Ramon set his empty glass on the bar and finally turned his full attention to Kenneth. The weight of that gaze made Kenneth take an involuntary step backward. "Do you know who I am?" Ramon asked. Kenneth shook his head, then stopped, uncertainty flickering across his face. I've heard the name Molina. Have you?" It wasn't a question. Kenneth's throat worked as he swallowed. "Look, if I'd known, if I'd had any idea, you would have done exactly the same thing." Ramon's voice remained conversational, almost gentle. "Because men like you don't calculate risk, you calculate audience. You saw Diana alone, dressed simply, and you saw an opportunity to feel powerful." He took a step closer. "What you didn't see was the wedding ring." Diana's left hand rested against her glass, And there it was, platinum band with a single diamond, modest by some standards but unmistakable. She'd been wearing it the whole time. Kenneth's eyes went to the ring, then widened with realization. He'd been so focused on her face, on making her feel small, that he'd missed the one detail that mattered. I didn't. Kenneth started, but the words died in his throat. Ramon continued as if Kenneth hadn't spoken. 5 years ago, you left my wife when she needed you most. When her father died. When she lost everything. Kenneth's face went pale. How do you, she told me. Ramon's expression didn't change. Not because she wanted revenge. Diana doesn't work that way. She told me because I asked about her past, and she doesn't lie to me. He glanced back at Diana, something soft passing through his eyes before they hardened again. She told me about a man who took her kindness and called it weakness, who took her trust and called it stupidity, who left her with nothing and convinced her it was her fault. Kenneth backed up another step, hit the bar counter. I was young. I was stupid. People change. Do they? Ramon's head tilted slightly. Because tonight, 5 years later, you saw her and your first instinct was violence. Not curiosity about where she'd been, not relief that she was okay. Violence. The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. I made a mistake, Kenneth whispered. You made several. Ramon's voice dropped lower, quieter, more dangerous. But your biggest mistake was assuming Diana was still alone. Still powerless. Still someone you could hurt without consequence. He nodded to Ernesto, who pulled something from his jacket pocket. A phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward Kenneth. On the screen was a photograph. Kenneth walking into an apartment building. Date stamp. 3 days ago. Another swipe. Kenneth getting into his car. Another date. Another swipe. Kenneth at a bar, not this one. A different one across town. We've been watching you, Ramon said casually, since Diana mentioned she was coming back to the city, just in case the past decided to resurface. Kenneth stared at the phone, comprehension dawning slowly. You knew I'd be here? No, but I knew you still lived in the area, still frequented the same places, still moved through the world like someone who'd never been held accountable. Ramon took the phone from Ernesto, studied the screen, then pocketed it. When Diana texted me tonight, one word. Trouble. I knew exactly what kind. He moved closer still, now less than 3 feet from Kenneth. Here's what you need to understand. I don't just know where you were 3 days ago. I know where you live, where you work, where your mother lives in assisted care on Maple Street, where your brother teaches high school in Riverside, where your ex-girlfriend Jamie works at the courthouse. Kenneth's breathing accelerated. Are you threatening? I'm explaining. Ramon's tone never changed. I'm explaining that you exist in my city at my discretion, that every street you walk, every bar you drink in, every breath you take is because I allow it. He leaned in slightly. And tonight you made me reconsider that allowance. Kenneth's legs gave out. He didn't fall so much as collapse, sliding down until he was sitting against the bar, legs sprawled in front of him like a puppet with cut strings. Sweat poured down his face, soaking into his collar. Please, he whispered. Please, I have a family. No, you don't. Ramon's correction was matter-of-fact, almost bored. You have a mother you visit twice a year, a brother you haven't spoken to in 6 months, an ex-girlfriend who changed her number specifically to avoid you. That's not family. That's just people who share your blood or your history and wish they didn't. Kenneth's mouth opened and closed silently. Ramon crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. This close, Kenneth could see the details he'd missed before: the thin scar along Ramon's jawline, the flecks of gray at his temples, the absolute absence of mercy in his dark eyes. But you're right to be scared, Ramon said quietly. Because I do have family. And you hurt her. I didn't know. Stop saying that. Ramon's voice remained soft, but something in it made Kenneth flinch. Saying you didn't know she was mine is the same as saying you would have hurt her if she belonged to no one. That's not a defense. That's a confession. Diana moved then, coming to stand beside Ramon. She looked down at Kenneth, and for a moment, something complicated passed across her face. Not satisfaction, not quite pity. Something more like recognition, seeing who someone truly was and accepting that you'd once loved them anyway. Do you remember what you said to me? She asked. The day you left? Kenneth stared up at her, his face blank with fear. You said I was dragging you down, that I was stuck. Diana's voice was steady, controlled. You said you tried to save me, but I wouldn't save myself. Diana, let me finish. She didn't raise her voice, but Kenneth went silent immediately. You were right about one thing. I was stuck. Stuck in grief. Stuck in poverty. Stuck in the belief that I needed you to survive. She paused, letting the words settle. Leaving me was the kindest thing you ever did, because it forced me to find out who I was without you. And it turns out, I was stronger than either of us knew. Kenneth's eyes darted between Diana and Ramon, looking for something forgiveness, perhaps, or an escape route that didn't exist. But tonight, Diana continued, you showed me you haven't changed at all. You saw someone you thought was weak, and your instinct was to make them feel weaker. To take whatever power you could from someone who couldn't fight back. She crouched down beside Ramon, the two of them forming a wall Kenneth couldn't breach. That's who you are, Kenneth. Not who you were 5 years ago. Who you are right now. Ramon stood, helping Diana up with him. He was silent for a long moment, his mind working through calculations Kenneth couldn't see. 7 years ago, Ramon said suddenly, a man tried to move stolen electronics through my territory. High-end stuff, laptops, phones, cameras. He didn't ask permission, didn't offer tribute. Just set up shop in a warehouse off Harrison and started selling. Kenneth's face changed a subtle shift, confusion mixing with something else. Recognition, maybe. Ramon noticed. You remember. I don't know what you're talking about, Kenneth said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Harrison Street, warehouse district. You were working with a guy named Tommy Reeves. Ramon's tone was conversational, like he was discussing the weather. Tommy's cousin had a connection to a shipping company, got you access to damaged merchandise that was supposed to be destroyed. You sold it under market value, made decent money for about 3 months. Kenneth had gone completely still. Then one night, 2 men in masks showed up. They didn't hurt you, just took the inventory and left. You filed a police report, but nothing came of it. You assumed it was a random robbery. Ramon smiled without humor. It was me. The confession landed like a physical blow. Kenneth's eyes widened, his breath coming in short gasps. You were operating in my district without permission. Ramon continued. But you were small-time, insignificant. So I just took the merchandise and let you go. Sent you a message without sending you to the hospital. He paused, letting that sink in. I spared you because you weren't worth the trouble. Ernesto had moved closer without Kenneth noticing. Now the large man stood just behind him, a silent presence that made the air feel thinner. That was mercy, Ramon said. The kind I give once. Maybe twice if I'm feeling generous. But never 3 times. Kenneth tried to speak, but his voice came out as a strangled whisper. That was 7 years ago. I didn't even know it was you. That's the point. Ramon's voice hardened. You've been living in my city for years, breathing my air, walking my streets, and you never even knew how close you came to disappearing. I let you live because you were nothing. He leaned down slightly. Tonight you stopped being nothing. Tonight you became a problem. The bar was so quiet you could hear breathing. Someone's phone buzzed, the vibration loud against wood, and they immediately silenced it. I can pay, Kenneth blurted out. Whatever you want. I have money, not much, but I can get more. I don't want your money. Ramon straightened, adjusting his cuffs. Men like you always think everything has a price, that you can buy your way out of consequences. He turned to Diana. What do you think he owes? The question caught everyone off guard, Diana most of all. She stared at Ramon for a moment, then down at Kenneth, still slumped against the bar like garbage waiting for collection. I think, she said slowly, he owes the truth. Kenneth blinked, confused. What truth? The truth about why you really left. Diana's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. You've told yourself for 5 years that you left because I was weak. Because I was dragging you down. But that's not why. She crouched down again, meeting his eyes. You left because my grief reminded you that you're capable of loss, that bad things happen to people you care about, and you couldn't handle that fear, so you ran. Kenneth's face crumpled. That's not... Yes, it is. Deanna's certainty was absolute. You left because you were scared, and you've spent 5 years telling yourself it was my fault so you wouldn't have to admit you were a coward. The word echoed in the silence. Kenneth's face flushed red, humiliation and rage and shame mixing together. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me I'm wrong, Diana challenged. Tell me you left because I was weak, not because you were scared. Kenneth opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. That's what I thought, Diana said softly. She stood, turned to Ramon. He can't even be honest with himself. Ramon nodded slowly. as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. He looked down at Kenneth with something almost like disappointment. "You know what's worse than being cruel?" Ramon asked. "Being cruel and lying to yourself about why." He snapped his fingers. The three enforcers moved as one. Ernesto reached Kenneth first, his massive hand closing around Kenneth's upper arm like a vice. Kenneth yelped an undignified sound that echoed off the wooden walls and tried to pull away. He might as well have tried to uproot an oak tree. "Wait, wait!" Kenneth's voice climbed into panic territory. "You can't do this. There are witnesses. Everyone's watching." Ramon turned to survey the room. 23 people scattered across tables and booths. 23 pairs of eyes that had watched Kenneth kick a woman, and now watched that same woman stand beside a man who could make problems disappear. "You're right," Ramon said. "They are watching." He raised his voice slightly, addressing the entire bar. "Everyone here saw what happened tonight. Saw this man assault my wife unprovoked. Saw him kick her while she was on the ground." Nods around the room. Nervous, reluctant, but confirmation nonetheless. "So let me be clear about something." Ramon's tone remained conversational, but it carried to every corner. "What happens next is justice. Not the kind that comes from courtrooms or police reports. The kind that comes from understanding that actions have consequences." He paused, letting that sink in. "Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now. Walk out those doors, go home, forget you were here. No questions asked, no consequences." Silence. Nobody moved. Ramon nodded slowly. "Good. Because the people who walk away from injustice are the same people who allow it to continue." Kenneth's eyes darted around the room, looking for anyone who might intervene. The couple by the window looked down at their drinks. The man in the plaid shirt suddenly became very interested in his phone. The bartender busied himself wiping down glasses that were already clean. "Please," Kenneth whispered, no longer addressing Ramon but the room itself. "Someone call the police. Please, the police," Ramon said almost gently. "Won't come. Not here. Not tonight. Because Officer Bradley, who usually patrols this district, is currently at his daughter's piano recital. And Officer Chen, who covers when Bradley's off duty, is on vacation in Florida." Kenneth's face went slack with horror. "I know these things," Ramon continued, "because it's my business to know. Just like I know the owner of this bar pays me $2,000 a month to make sure problems get handled quietly. Just like I know the city inspector who was supposed to cite this place for health violations last month somehow forgot to file his report." He gestured around the room. "This whole city runs on favors and fear, Kenneth, and you never bothered to learn the rules." Diana watched Kenneth's face cycle through emotions: terror, rage, desperation, and back to terror. Part of her felt something that might have been pity 5 years ago. Now it was just exhaustion. Exhaustion at being the thing men like Kenneth needed to break in order to feel whole. She'd carried his abandonment like a stone for so long, let it weigh her down, shape her, define her. And then, slowly, she'd learned to set it down, to walk away from it, to understand that his cruelty said everything about him and nothing about her worth. Tonight was simply the closing of a circle that should have closed years ago. Ramon glanced at her, a silent question in his eyes. "Are you sure?" Diana nodded once. "I'm sure." Permission granted. Ramon turned back to Kenneth and spoke with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "You abandoned her when she was weak. You humiliated her in public. You kicked her when she was on the ground." Each phrase was measured, deliberate. "Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. And every choice has a price." He nodded to Ernesto. "Stand him up." Ernesto hauled Kenneth to his feet with the same ease someone might lift a bag of groceries. Kenneth's legs barely supported his weight. Leo moved to his other side, gripping his arm. Between the two enforcers, Kenneth looked like a child between adults. "What are you going to do?" Kenneth's voice cracked. "I'm going to teach you something," Ramon said. "The same lesson you tried to teach Diana tonight. About power, about helplessness, about what it feels like when someone decides you don't matter." He walked over to the nearest table, a young couple who'd been on a date before the night turned dark. They looked up at him with wide eyes. "You too. Leave." They didn't need to be told twice. The man threw cash on the table too much, probably his whole wallet, and they practically ran for the door. Mateo unlocked it just long enough for them to slip through, then locked it again behind them. "Anyone else?" Ramon called out. "Anyone who doesn't want to see what happens to men who hurt women in my territory?" 3 more people stood: an older woman, a man with graying temples, a young guy in a university sweatshirt. They filed out quickly, eyes down, silent. The door clicked locked behind them. That left 17 witnesses, 17 people who'd chosen, consciously or not, to see this through. Ramon nodded, satisfied. Good. Now everyone here understands. This isn't random. This isn't excessive. This is proportional. He turned back to Kenneth, who was now openly weeping, tears streaming down his face. Please, Kenneth sobbed. Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Diana, please tell him you forgive me. Diana stepped forward, and for a moment, Kenneth's face lit with desperate hope. Then she spoke. 5 years ago, I would have forgiven you. I would have made excuses for you, convinced myself you were hurting too, that you did the best you could, that I was asking too much. Her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the hushed bar. But I'm not that person anymore, and you don't get to use my kindness as a shield now that you're facing consequences. She looked at Ramon, then back at Kenneth. You kicked me because you thought I was powerless. Let's see how it feels when the roles are reversed. Kenneth's legs gave out. Only Ernesto and Leo's grip kept him upright. Ramon stepped back, giving himself space. He removed his jacket, folded it carefully, and draped it over a bar stool, rolled up his sleeves. The tattoos on his forearms became visible, more names, more warnings, a whole history written in ink and scar tissue. Hold him steady, Ramon said quietly. Then he moved. The first punch was precise, a sharp jab to Kenneth's solar plexus that doubled him over, gasping. The enforcers held him up, forcing him upright. The second came faster, a hook to the ribs that made something crack audibly. Kenneth screamed. The sound was raw, primal, the kind of noise that comes from a body that's never known real violence receiving a concentrated dose. It echoed off the walls, bounced back, seemed to multiply in the small space. Ramon didn't speak, didn't explain, just delivered blow after measured blow. Not wild, not angry, clinical. Each strike calculated to cause maximum pain without causing death. Ribs, stomach, kidneys, the soft meat of the thighs. Diana watched without flinching. This violence was being done in her name, but it wasn't for her. Not really. It was for every woman who'd been kicked while down, every person who'd been abandoned when weak, every victim who'd been told their suffering didn't matter. It was for the system of silence that let men like Kenneth operate without consequence. Around the room, people watched in horrified fascination. Some couldn't look away. Others stared at their drinks, listening to the sounds flesh on flesh, Kenneth's sobs, Ramon's controlled breathing. No one left. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Ramon stepped back. His knuckles were split, blood Kenneth's and his own smeared across his hands. He wasn't even breathing hard. Kenneth hung between the enforcers like wet laundry, barely conscious, his face a mask of blood and tears and snot. Ramon picked up his jacket, pulled out a white handkerchief, and carefully cleaned his hands. Then he walked over to Diana, his eyes searching her face. Enough? He asked softly. Diana looked at Kenneth, really looked at him. Saw the man who'd once made her laugh, the man who'd walked away, the man who'd learned nothing and become worse. Not yet, she said. Ramon smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Good. Ramon nodded to his men. Ernesto and Leo dragged Kenneth to the center of the floor, away from the bar, away from the tables. Mateo moved swiftly through the room, pushing chairs aside, creating space, a makeshift arena carved from old wood and broken glass. Kenneth's head lolled forward, blood dripping from his split lip onto the floor in slow, deliberate drops. Each one landed with a soft pat that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Look at me, Ramon commanded. Kenneth didn't respond. Ernesto grabbed a fistful of his hair and yanked his head up. Kenneth's eyes struggled to focus, pupils dilated with shock and pain. I said, look at me. This time Kenneth obeyed, his gaze swimming until it found Ramon's face. You're still breathing, Ramon said. That's mercy. Do you understand? Every breath you take right now is a gift I'm choosing to give you. Kenneth's mouth moved, forming words that came out as nothing but wet sounds. But mercy has limits. Ramon circled him slowly, predator assessing prey, and you crossed every single one. He stopped in front of Diana, reached out and gently took her hand. Her knuckles were still scraped from catching herself on the glass-strewn floor. Small cuts, superficial, but they'd drawn blood. Ramon lifted her hand, showing it to Kenneth. You did this, he said quietly. And this is just what's visible. Diana's ribs ached where Kenneth's foot had connected. She could feel the bruise forming beneath her shirt, spreading like spilled ink. Tomorrow it would be purple and yellow, a temporary tattoo of violence. But she'd had worse, survived worse. This was nothing compared to what Kenneth had taken from her 5 years ago. "Let him go," Ramon said. Ernesto and Leo released Kenneth simultaneously. He crumpled immediately, hitting the floor hard, unable to catch himself. His hands splayed against the wood, trying to push himself up. He made it to his knees, swaying. "Stand up," Ramon ordered. "I can't." Kenneth's voice was barely a whisper. "Stand up." Kenneth tried. His legs shook, threatened to give out. But fear is a powerful motivator. He managed to get one foot under him, then the other. Standing now, but barely. A strong wind could have toppled him. Ramon didn't give him a strong wind. He gave him violence. It happened fast. Faster than the witnesses could fully process. Ramon moved like water fluid, inevitable, impossible to stop. A sweep to Kenneth's legs took him down. Before he hit the floor, Ramon's knee was there, connecting with his stomach. Kenneth folded around it, all air evacuating his lungs in a single whoosh. Then Ramon was pulling him up by his collar, slamming him against the bar. Glass bottles rattled. One fell, shattered. Nobody flinched. "You want to know the difference between us?" Ramon said, his face inches from Kenneth's. "When you hurt Diana, you did it to feel powerful. When I hurt you, I do it to teach a lesson." He threw Kenneth away from the bar. Kenneth stumbled backward, crashed into a table. It toppled, taking him down with it. Chairs scattered. More glass broke someone's forgotten beer bottle. Kenneth tried to crawl away, pathetic, desperate. His fingers clawed at the floor, seeking purchase, seeking escape that didn't exist. Leo was there, casual as Sunday morning, blocking his path. Kenneth changed direction. Mateo appeared, arms crossed, immovable. Kenneth spun, looking for any exit, and found Ernesto staring down at him with the expression of a man watching paint dry. "There's nowhere to go," Ramon said from behind him. "No one coming to save you. No excuse that will make this stop. Do you understand yet? This is what helplessness feels like." Kenneth sobbed great heaving gasps that shook his whole body. "Please God, please stop." "Did you stop when Diana asked?" Ramon's question was genuine, curious almost. "Did you show her mercy when she said she didn't want trouble?" Kenneth had no answer. Or rather, his answer was written in Diana's scraped palms and bruised ribs. Ramon grabbed the back of Kenneth's shirt, hauled him upright like a sack of meat. For a moment they stood there, Ramon holding him up, Kenneth's feet barely touching the ground. "Look at her," Ramon commanded, turning Kenneth to face Diana. Kenneth's eyes found her through the swelling and blood. Diana stood exactly where she'd been, arms wrapped around herself, Ramon's jacket still draped over her shoulders. She looked small in that moment, but not weak. Never weak. Surviving. "Apologize," Ramon said. "I'm sorry," Kenneth choked out. "I'm so sorry, Diana, please." "Not to me," Ramon interrupted. "To her. A real apology. Not the kind where you're sorry you got caught, the kind where you actually understand what you did." Kenneth stared at Diana. Blood ran down his face. His left eye was swelling shut, 3 teeth loose in his mouth. Pain in every breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I was too weak to stay. I'm sorry I tried to break you because I was broken. I'm sorry." "That's enough," Diana said quietly. The words stopped Kenneth mid-sentence. He looked at her with something like hope, like maybe this meant it was over. Diana walked forward, each step deliberate. When she reached Kenneth, she looked up at him. Even broken, he was taller than her. But height didn't matter anymore. "I accept your apology," she said. "But accepting it doesn't mean forgiving you. It just means I'm letting go of the weight I've been carrying. The weight of thinking I deserved what you did." She paused, making sure he heard every word. "I didn't deserve it. I never did. And when I walk out of here tonight, I'll be free of you completely." She turned to Ramon. "I'm done." Ramon released Kenneth. Without support, Kenneth collapsed again, hitting the floor hard. He stayed there, curled into himself, making sounds that weren't quite words. Ramon retrieved his jacket from Diana's shoulders, helped her into it properly this time. Then he looked down at Kenneth with something that might have been pity in another man but was simple calculation in him. "You have a choice now," Ramon said. "You can walk out of here, leave this city, and never come back. Never speak Diana's name. Never think about this night. Disappear." Kenneth lifted his head slightly, blood-crusted eyes hopeful. "Or," Ramon continued, "you can stay. You can go to the police. You can try to press charges. You can tell everyone what happened here." He crouched down, bringing himself to Kenneth's level one last time. "But if you stay, if you talk, if you make this public, I'll finish what I started. And next time, there won't be witnesses. There won't be a floor to collapse on. There will just be your name on a missing persons report that gets filed and forgotten." He stood. "So choose. Right now." Kenneth's mouth worked, trying to form words through split lips and loose teeth. "I'll go," he finally managed. "I'll leave. Tonight. I swear I'll leave." "Good." Ramon gestured to Mateo. "Get him out of here. Make sure he packs a bag and drives until he hits state lines. If he stops, if he turns around, if he even slows down, call me." Mateo nodded, moved to haul Kenneth up. "Wait," Diana said. Everyone froze. She walked over to where Kenneth hung in Mateo's grip, reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph, worn at the edges from being carried. "This is the last thing you gave me," she said, showing it to him. It was a picture of them from years ago. Young, smiling, before everything fell apart. Diana held it up, then slowly tore it in half, then in half again. The pieces fluttered to the floor like snow. "Now you're gone," she said. Completely. Kenneth was dragged toward the back exit, the one that led to the alley, to the darkness, to whatever future waited for men who learned their lessons too late. The door opened. Kenneth disappeared through it. The door closed. The back door of the tiger's den didn't lead to freedom. It led to a brick-walled alley, damp with the city's grime and smelling of stale beer and decay. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the narrow passage lit by a single flickering bulb above a rusted dumpster. The night air was cold, a sharp contrast to the claustrophobic heat of the bar. Mateo and Leo hauled Kenneth through the threshold. His feet dragged, leaving twin trails in the wet filth of the alley floor. He was a broken thing now, a composition of whimpering sounds and trembling limbs. The arrogant man who'd kicked a woman to feel tall was gone. In his place was this raw, bleeding animal, all pretense stripped away by Ramon's calculated violence. Diana stood in the doorway, backlit by the bar's amber glow. She didn't step into the alley, but she watched. This was the final frame of the picture Kenneth had started painting 5 years ago. She needed to see it finished. Ramon moved past her, his silhouette sharp against the light. He didn't look at Kenneth right away. Instead, he surveyed the alley, his gaze touching the fire escape, the dumpster, the distant mouth of the passage where it met the street. He was checking the perimeter, even now. This was his territory. Every shadow belonged to him. "Please," Kenneth rasped from the ground. The word was mangled, pushed through swollen lips and shattered pride. "Don't kill me." Ramon turned slowly. He crouched, bringing himself to Kenneth's eye level. The flickering bulb cast harsh lines across his face, making the tattoos on his neck seem to move in the unstable light. "I'm not going to kill you," Ramon said, his voice almost kind. It was the gentleness that made it terrifying. "Death is a release, an ending. You don't deserve an ending, Kenneth. You deserve a consequence." Kenneth's one good eye swam with tears. "I'll leave. I'll go. You'll never see me again." "I know," Ramon said. He reached out and with a startling tenderness brushed a clot of blood from Kenneth's eyebrow. Kenneth flinched as if struck. "But leaving isn't enough. You need to understand why you're leaving." He stood up, his knees cracking softly in the quiet alley. He looked at Diana, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Stand him up," Ramon said. Mateo and Leo hauled Kenneth upright again. He swayed between them, his head lolling. "Look at her," Ramon commanded. Kenneth's gaze, bleary and unfocused, found Diana in the doorway. She hadn't moved. The borrowed jacket was too big on her frame, but she wore it like armor. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear, dry. She was done crying for this man. 5 years ago, Ramon said, his voice carrying clearly in the confined space. "You walked out a door and left her in silence. You took her future, her security, her belief that people stay. You told yourself it was her fault, that she was the burden, that you were moving up." He stepped closer to Kenneth, his presence like a physical weight. "But you didn't move up, Kenneth. You just moved on. You left wreckage behind and called it progress. You built a life on the lie that you were better than the woman you broke." Kenneth tried to shake his head, a weak denial. I didn't mean." "You never mean," Diana said. Her voice, quiet but firm, cut through the alley. It was the first time she'd spoken since they dragged him out. You never mean to hurt. You never mean to abandon. You just do it. And the not meaning is supposed to make it okay. She took one step out of the doorway, onto the damp concrete. Her boots made no sound. But it's not okay. It was never okay. Ramon watched her, his pride evident even in the darkness. This was her moment, her verdict. You kicked me tonight, Diana continued, walking slowly toward Kenneth. But the real wound was 5 years old. The kick just reopened it, let all the poison out. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough for him to see the woman she'd become. The hardness in her eyes he didn't recognize, the calm he couldn't comprehend. So here's your consequence, Kenneth. You're going to disappear. Not just from this city. From yourself. The man who did these things? He's gone. You're going to drive until you forget your own name. You're going to find a job that doesn't ask questions. You're going to live small and quiet and afraid. And every night, when you try to sleep, you're going to see my face. Not from tonight. From 5 years ago. When I asked you to stay. And you walked out that door. Her words weren't shouted. They were etched into the cold air, permanent. Kenneth began to sob openly, a ragged, ugly sound. Diana, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, she said. And she did. She could see it now, the hollow, terrified regret of a man finally facing the monster he'd chosen to be. But your sorry doesn't rebuild what you broke. It just tells me you finally understand the cost. She turned to Ramon. Let him go. Ramon nodded to his men. They released Kenneth. He collapsed to his knees, not in a dramatic faint, but in absolute defeat. The fight, the arrogance, the very essence of him, had been pummeled out onto the bar floor and left in the alley filth. Ramon pulled a set of car keys from his pocket, not his own, a cheap single key on a generic ring. He tossed them into Kenneth's lap. Blue sedan, end of the alley. Registration and title in the glove box. It's clean. There's $500 in the console. Ramon's tone was that of a businessman concluding a transaction. Drive east. Don't stop until you hit the ocean. Find a new name. Forget this one. Kenneth stared at the keys as if they were a snake. If you come back, Ramon added, his voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the alley air. If you ever speak her name again, if you so much as look in the direction of this city, the mercy ends. And I will send men who don't ask questions. Do you understand? A shudder ran through Kenneth's broken body. He nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. Say it, Ramon commanded. I understand, Kenneth choked out. Good. Ramon turned, offering his arm to Diana. She took it, her hand small in the crook of his elbow. Together, they walked away from Kenneth, back toward the light of the open doorway. They didn't look back. Behind them, they heard the scrape of Kenneth struggling to his feet, the fumble of the keys, the staggering footsteps growing fainter as he stumbled toward the waiting car, toward his hollow future. At the doorway, Diana paused. She glanced over her shoulder, not at Kenneth, but at the alley itself, the scene of the ending. She took a deep breath, inhaling the cold, dirty air, and let it out slowly. Then she stepped through the door, leaving the alley and the ghost of the woman she'd been behind. The door began to swing shut. In the narrowing slice of light, Kenneth was a hunched silhouette, fumbling with a car door. Then Leo pulled the door closed. The click of the latch was soft, final. Inside the tiger's den, the silence was complete. The lock clicked shut, sealing away the alley, the car, the man. The tiger's den was left in a silence so profound it felt like a physical entity. The air was thick with the scent of spilled bourbon, sweat, and the coppery tang of blood. 20-odd people sat frozen in the wreckage, surrounded by overturned tables, shattered glass, and the echoing memory of violence. Diana stood with her back to the door, Ramon's solid presence beside her. The bar's patrons were a gallery of stunned faces, their eyes wide, phones now conspicuously absent. The spectacle was over. Now came the reckoning. Ramon's enforcers, Ernesto, Leo, Mateo, had resumed their positions near the exits, statues once more. Their job had shifted from active enforcement to imposing finality. No one was getting out until this was truly finished. Diana let go of Ramon's arm. She needed to stand alone for this. She shrugged off his jacket, handing it back to him with a look of gratitude that needed no words. Then she turned to face the room. Her gaze swept over them, the nervous couple, the ashamed bartender, the man in plaid who'd laughed. They all flinched under her attention. She was no longer the invisible woman on the floor. She was the eye of the storm that had just passed through. "You all saw," she began, her voice clear but not loud. It carried in the hush. "You saw him shove me. You heard him humiliate me. You saw him kick me." A few people looked down at their hands. One woman nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Some of you laughed," Diana continued, and the man in plaid shrunk in his seat. "Some of you looked away. Some of you filmed it, thinking it was just another bar fight. Something to watch." She took a slow step forward, her boots crunching on broken glass. "I don't blame you," she said, and the words were so unexpected that heads lifted. "You didn't know me. You saw a conflict and you defaulted to being an audience. It's what people do." Ramon watched her, a quiet intensity in his eyes. This was her stage now. "But I want you to understand something," Diana said. Her voice grew stronger, layered with a hard-won conviction. "What you witnessed tonight wasn't just a man being punished. It was a debt being paid. 5 years ago, that man took everything from me when I had nothing left to give. He didn't just leave. He tried to erase me. Tonight, he thought he could finish the job. She walked to the center of the room, standing where Kenneth had been held. A dark stain smeared the floorboards. "The man who just left." She paused, choosing her words with care. "He believes the world is made of strong people and weak people, that the strong get to hurt the weak. That's the only power he understands." Her eyes found Ramon's for a moment, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than the room could fathom. "But there's another kind of power," Diana said, turning back to the witnesses. "It's the power to survive, to get back up, to walk out of the darkness even when you can't see the path. That power doesn't come from hurting others. It comes from enduring what hurts you and choosing not to pass it on." She wasn't preaching. She was testifying, and the bar had become her church. "I didn't bring my husband here for revenge," she said, and the word husband landed with new weight. "I texted him because I was in trouble. He came because that's what you do for family. What happened after? That was the consequence of a man who never learned that actions have weight, who thought cruelty was free." The bartender finally moved, slowly picking up a cloth and beginning to wipe the bar, a nervous, automatic gesture. "You can leave now," Diana announced, her tone shifting from personal to declarative. "The doors are unlocked. Go home to your families, your routines, your safe little worlds. Forget the details if you want, but don't forget the lesson." She looked at each of them, her gaze steady. "The next time you see someone being kicked while they're down, maybe not literally, but in all the ways a person can be kicked, you don't have to be a hero. You don't have to fight, but see them. Don't look away, because looking away is what lets men like Kenneth believe they own the world." A choked sob came from the older woman near the window. She nodded rapidly, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Ramon stepped forward then, his movement breaking the spell. He didn't address the crowd. His focus was entirely on Diana. He held out his hand, not to lead her, but to offer an anchor. "Ready?" he asked, his voice soft. Diana looked around the bar one last time at the broken furniture, the scared faces, the end of her old ghost story. She felt no triumph, only a profound, settling peace. The chapter was closed. The book could be shelved. "Yes," she said, and placed her hand in his. "I'm ready." Together, they walked toward the front entrance. Mateo unlocked the door and pulled it open. The night air rushed in, cold and clean, washing away the stifling atmosphere of violence and fear. A black luxury sedan idled at the curb, its windows tinted, engine a soft purr. A driver stood waiting beside the open rear door. Diana paused on the threshold, glancing back one final time. The patrons were beginning to stir, gathering coats, speaking in hushed, shell-shocked tones. They would carry this story with them, in fragments and whispers, a warning, a legend. She turned her face to the street, to the man beside her, to the life that waited beyond this haunted place. Ramon helped her into the car, his hand a gentle guide on her back. He slid in beside her. The door closed with a solid, expensive thunk, sealing them in a world of quiet leather and subdued light. Through the window, she saw the neon sign of the Tiger's Den flicker once, then hold steady, red and gold against the dark. The car pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent. In the back seat, Ramon didn't ask if she was okay. He simply took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. His knuckles were split and bruised, a testament to the violence he'd metered out on her behalf. She traced the scars on his hand with her thumb, over and over, a silent acknowledgement. They drove without speaking. The city lights blurred past, a river of gold and shadow. Diana leaned her head against the cool window, watching her reflection superimpose on the passing world. The woman in the glass looked tired. She looked quiet, but for the first time in 5 years, she looked whole. The storm was over. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything she had survived, and everything, finally, that she no longer had to carry. The car didn't take them to one of Ramon's penthouse apartments or fortified compounds. It wound through the sleeping city and up into the hills, where the lights below became a distant, glittering tapestry. It stopped before a wrought iron gate that swung open silently, revealing a house that was not a fortress, but a home. Low, modern, with walls of glass reflecting the star-dusted sky. This was Diana's sanctuary, a place Kenneth's ghost had never haunted. Inside, the air smelled of citrus and polished wood. A single lamp glowed in the living room, casting soft light on shelves of books and the vibrant colors of a painting they'd bought together in Oaxaca. This was the life she had built, piece by careful piece, in the quiet aftermath of ruin. Ramon went to the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of water. He handed her one, his eyes searching her face in the dim light. "The ribs?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Bruised," she said, "not broken." She took a sip, the cool water a balm. "The rest of it feels lighter," he nodded, understanding that she didn't mean her body. He led her to the wide sofa overlooking the valley, and they sat in a silence that was companionable, charged with the night's catharsis but not burdened by it. "He'll keep driving," Ramon said after a while. It wasn't a question. "The car will be found abandoned in another state. The money will run out. He'll become a ghost of his own making, a rumor in a new town." Diana listened, watching the lights of the city. "I don't need to know the details," she said softly. "That story is over." She turned to him, studying the sharp lines of his profile, the ink on his neck that spoke of a world she had only glimpsed. "You didn't have to do that. For me." Ramon looked at her, his dark eyes unguarded. "Yes, I did. Not just for you. For the principle. A man who uses his strength to prey on the hurting doesn't get to keep that strength. That's one of my rules." He reached over, his thumb gently brushing the faint scar on her jawline from Albuquerque. "But for you, I would have rewritten every rule." The truth of it hummed between them. His power was vast, complex, and often brutal, but the part of it he gave to her, the protection, the loyalty, the unwavering sight, was pure. He hadn't saved her. He had seen the survivor already there, and he had chosen to stand beside her. "When I met you," Diana said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was so tired of being strong. I thought strength was just bearing weight until you collapsed. You showed me it could be something else. It could be a choice, a weapon, a wall to keep the wolves out." She leaned into him, her head finding the space between his shoulder and chest. His arm came around her, solid and sure. "I used to think power was what he had," she murmured, thinking of Kenneth's swagger, his loud voice, his need to dominate. The money, the arrogance, the ability to make people flinch. "But that's not power. That's just noise." "What is it then?" Ramon asked, his chin resting on her hair. "Power," she said, the concept crystallizing as she spoke, "is the quiet in this room. It's the safety to be still. It's knowing who you are and what you're worth, and letting that be the only currency that matters." She paused. "It's walking away from a burning wreck and not spending your life staring at the ashes." Ramon held her tighter. He was a man who commanded streets, who settled disputes with a glance, whose name was whispered with fear, but in this moment, he was just a husband, listening to his wife find the words for her freedom. They sat like that as the night deepened. The adrenaline of the evening had bled away, leaving a profound exhaustion and a cleaner kind of peace. The memories of her father's loss, the eviction notices, the crushing invisibility, they were not gone. They were facts of her history, but they were no longer anchors. They were stones she had climbed. Eventually, she stirred. "I'm going to take a shower. Wash the night off." He kissed her forehead. "I'll be here." Under the stream of hot water, Diana let the events of the evening flow down the drain, the sting of the shove, the shock of the kick, the taste of old fear, the sight of Kenneth's final, crumbling defeat. She scrubbed not with violence but with finality. When she stepped out, wrapping herself in a soft towel, she felt new, not reborn, but reset. The slate, finally, truly wiped clean. She dressed in simple sleep clothes and padded back to the living room. Ramon was still on the sofa, looking out at the view, a single glass of amber liquor in his hand. He had changed into dark sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, the intimidating Mafia boss replaced by the man beneath. She went to the glass wall, standing before the panorama of the city she had fled, and to which she had returned as someone entirely different. "He thought he left me with nothing," she said, her reflection a ghost over the lights. And he was right. But nothing is a good place to start. When you have nothing, you get to choose what you build. Ramon came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. In the glass, she saw their reflection, his solid form behind hers, her face calm, resolved. "What did you build, Diana?" he asked. She met his eyes in the reflection. "Myself," she said. "And then I built this. A life. A home. A love that doesn't leave when things get hard." He bent his head, pressing a kiss to the crown of her hair. No more words were needed. The city glittered, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere in its labyrinth, a broken man was driving east, becoming a cautionary tale. Here in the hills, the woman he'd tried to erase stood, whole and loved, watching the dawn begin to lighten the edge of the sky. Some debts are paid in violence, some are paid in silence, some are paid in disappearance. And some women, the ones who learn to carry their own weight, who rebuild themselves from the wreckage, who find a love that is a shelter and not a cage, they pay their debts by living well, by rising, by walking away, and never, ever looking back. Diana took Ramon's hand, lacing her fingers through his. She did not look back. "Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.